The wind howled like a living thing, sharp and relentless, rattling the patrol SUV's windows as Officer Mason Hale rolled past the last grocery store in town. Just another quiet winter night in Redwood Hollow, or so he thought. But then Hunter, his canine partner, let out a low growl, his nose pressed hard against the glass. It was the kind of growl Mason had only heard on two occasions, once before a drug bust and once before they pulled a runaway kid out of an abandoned root cellar. So why now in front of a closed supermarket, buried in snow? Redwood Hollow was the kind of town where not much happened, and that's the way most folks liked it. Tucked in the foothills of northern Idaho, its winters were long, its people were tough, and its streets were usually rolled up by 8 p.m. Officer Mason Hale liked the quiet. After 2 tours overseas and a decade in law enforcement, he welcomed the predictability. His partner, Hunter, a golden brown German shepherd with nerves of steel and a nose like a magnet for trouble, did too, though the dog had a habit of sensing when quiet wasn't going to last. That Thursday evening, the snow had started falling just before sunset. Not a gentle flurry, the kind that made kids run outside with sleds, but a full-blown visibility zero blizzard. Schools had closed early. Most businesses locked up before the 5 o'clock news even aired, except apparently Burke's Market. The supermarket's neon signs still flickered in the swirling snow as Mason cruised past it, his SUV humming quietly down Main Street. The lot was empty, no shoppers, no carts, just rows of plowed snowbanks and the store's loading dock light blinking lazily in the back. He would have driven right by if not for Hunter. The K9 had been sitting still, as usual, watching the snow in silence. Then his ears perked, nose twitched, and he let out that low, deliberate growl. Mason braked hard. Hunter moved to the back window and stared toward the rear alley behind Burke's. His nose nudged the door handle, then turned to stare at Mason like, "We need to check that out." Mason sighed. "You smell something, bud?" Another growl. He put the SUV in reverse and turned onto the narrow access lane behind the building. Snow crunched beneath the tires. The alley was deserted except for the faint trace of footprints leading toward the back loading dock. Mason's eyes narrowed. The store had closed nearly 2 hours ago. He parked and stared. The wind bit at his face, snow already piling on his shoulders. Hunter leapt from the vehicle and sniffed along the footprints, tail stiff, body tense. The footprints stopped at the metal door. But they didn't come back out. Mason knocked. Nothing. He glanced at the metal padlock on the service door. Still latched. But Hunter started whining low, circling the area near a stack of frozen pallets and bags of salt. Then Mason saw it, half buried under fresh powder, a single pink mitten wedged near the door frame. Tiny, child-sized. He picked it up, shaking off the snow. A wave of dread slid through his chest. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered to himself. Hunter barked once, sharp, urgent. Still, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no lights inside, and the storm was making it hard to see or hear anything clearly. Mason ran his flashlight over the door again. The keypad lock blinked red. The building was definitely sealed. He walked back to the SUV, mitten in hand. Maybe someone had dropped it hours ago. Maybe it wasn't anything. Still, he wrote a quick note in his logbook and snapped a photo of the tracks in the glove. He had no probable cause to enter. Not yet. Hunter, however, remained by the door, ears up, tail rigid, nose to the gap near the bottom of the loading dock. "Let's go," Mason called. But Hunter didn't budge. It was 7:42 p.m. when the call moment. A missing person report, 17-year-old Kayla Winters. Last seen leaving her shift at Burke's Market at 5 p.m. She hadn't come home. Her mom tried calling the store, but no one answered. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Mason's blood ran cold. "Dispatch, this is Hale," he said into the radio. "I was just at Burke's. No signs of anyone there, but I may need to double back." He turned the SUV around before dispatch could finish replying. Hunter, still on high alert, climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation. Back at Burke's, the front entrance was locked. The store's lights were mostly off, save for a flicker from the office in the back. Mason pounded on the glass. After a minute, a tall man in a store vest opened the door with a groggy look on his face. Clay Rourke, night manager. Late 30s, thin frame, greasy hair, tucked under a Burke's cap. "Sorry, officer," Clay said, stifling a yawn. "Didn't hear you with the storm and all. What's the issue?" I'm looking for a girl, Kayla Winters. Worked here today? Clay blinked. Yeah, she was here, clocked out before close. Probably walked home. Alone in this? Mason gestured to the howling blizzard outside. Clay shrugged. She didn't seem worried. Maybe got picked up. Who knows? I've been doing inventory and back. Mason watched him carefully. Hunter stood between them, staring at Clay without blinking. You have security cameras? Not really. Systems, well, it's been down since last week. Maintenance hasn't come out yet. Convenient. Mason didn't like it. None of it. But without a warrant, all he could do was ask questions. Mind if we check the loading dock? Clay hesitated. There's nothing back there, officer. Just ice bags and pallets. It's locked. I'd like to take a quick look. Clay sighed and led them through the dark aisles toward the back. The store was dead silent, the hum of refrigeration units echoing unnaturally through the frozen air. Hunter's nose twitched as they passed a door marked Employees Only. The manager stopped at the loading dock door. See? Locked up tight. Hunter let out a sudden, vicious bark. The sound startled Clay and made Mason take a hard look at the lock again. Sir, Mason said slowly, I'm going to need you to stay here while I call this in. Clay's eyes shifted. Why, he asked. Mason didn't answer. He was already reaching for his radio. Hunter moved toward the stockroom door again, body low, tail wagging slowly but deliberately. Someone was back there. And Mason had just made up his mind. He wasn't leaving without finding out what. The storm hadn't let up, not one bit. Snow pelted the windshield like 1,000 tiny bullets as Officer Mason Hale sat inside his patrol SUV, engine idling, thoughts racing. He stared at the loading dock door of Burke's Market, where Hunter had just gone wild a few minutes earlier. Something was wrong. His instincts told him so. More importantly, Hunter knew. But instincts didn't get you a search warrant in Idaho. Mason picked up the radio. Dispatch, this is Hale. I need confirmation on that missing person. Kayla Winters. Age, last seen time, any medical conditions? Static crackled for the moment before the dispatcher's voice came through. Confirmed, 17-year-old white female, 5'5", brown hair, blue eyes. Reported missing by her mother, Deborah Winters. Last seen leaving her part-time shift at Burke's Market at 5 p.m. today. No known medical issues. Cell phone has been going to voicemail since 6 p.m. Mason exhaled through his nose. He looked toward the rear of the store again, where Hunter still paced near the back door, sniffing at the frozen ground, his tail rigid. He clicked the mic. Copy that. I'm on site now. Requesting backup unit and permission to initiate wellness check based on reasonable suspicion. There was a pause, then, hold tight, Officer Hale. Sergeant Porter wants you to wait for confirmation. ETA on backup is 35 minutes due to road conditions. 35 minutes? Mason shook his head. A lot could happen in 35 minutes, especially if a 17-year-old girl was freezing behind that door. Literally. Inside the store, Clay Rourke was growing increasingly fidgety. He leaned against a stack of beer boxes near the back office, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. You said her mom filed a report? He asked casually. Mason nodded but didn't answer. He was watching every movement, every subtle twitch in Clay's expression. She probably just went to her boyfriend's place, Clay added. You know how kids are. They don't call, parents panic, and we end up freezing our butts off in a grocery store for nothing. Mason didn't smile. Hunter doesn't panic, Mason replied coolly, and right now he thinks something's behind that door. Clay chuckled nervously. You trust that dog more than your fellow man, huh? Every day of the week, Mason said, twice on Sundays. Clay opened his mouth as if to argue, but before he could speak, Hunter barked again, sharp and loud, his paws scratching at the stockroom door marked Employees Only. Mason's eyes narrowed. What's behind that door? Just freezer storage, Clay said. Ice cream, meats. You know, stuff that needs to stay below zero. It locked? Clay hesitated. Yeah, automatically seals when closed. It's an old safety thing. Been like that since before I started here. Key? Clay swallowed. In my office. Let's get it. They walked in silence toward the cramped manager's office behind the customer service desk. Clay unlocked a drawer and fished out a large ring of keys, his fingers fumbling. He dropped them once. Mason didn't rush him, but he noticed. Once the key was in hand, Mason radioed again. Dispatch requesting expedited clearance to conduct wellness check. Strong behavioral indicators from suspect. K9 unit has locked onto one door. Silence. Then, Hale, you're clear. Proceed, Unit 42 en route. That was all Mason needed. Hunter growled low as Mason inserted the key into the freezer door's lock. The air around them grew colder. It wasn't just the freezing temperature. It was the weight of what might be on the other side. Click. The lock turned. The metal door groaned as it swung open. A blast of frigid air hit them in the face like walking into a walk-in tomb. The sound of the freezer fans was loud and mechanical. Frost coated the metal shelves and floor tiles. Then Hunter darted in. He moved past stacks of frozen meats in plastic-wrapped boxes toward the far right corner where a large plastic bin was shoved against the wall. Hunter barked. Once, twice, then whimpered. Mason rushed forward and saw her. A girl, crumpled, pale, barely moving. Her lips were blue, her fingers purple, her eyes half open, frozen tears clinging to her lashes. She wore a green Burke's apron and a light coat, now soaked with condensation from the freezer walls. Mason dropped to his knees. Kayla Winters? Her eyes fluttered. Oh, cold, she whispered. Gotcha, Mason said softly, reaching for his radio. Dispatch, medical emergency. I have the victim, 17-year-old female, found alive, severe hypothermia. Repeat, found alive. Hunter whined and licked the side of Kayla's face. She smiled, barely. The paramedics arrived 22 minutes later. Longest 22 minutes of Mason Hale's life. He stayed with Kayla the entire time, wrapping her in thermal blankets pulled from the emergency kit in his SUV. Her pulse was weak, but steady. She drifted in and out of consciousness. But one thing was clear. She never should have been in there that long. I locked it from the outside, she mumbled once. He put me in. Who, Kayla? But she was already slipping again. Mason looked at Clay, who was now backed against the wall, hands up, face pale. I didn't mean to, he stammered. She had a phone. She was recording me. I panicked. Mason didn't say a word. He pulled out his cuffs. Outside, the storm was finally starting to break. Snow still fell, but slower now, softer. As the ambulance pulled away, Kayla tucked safely inside. Mason stood near his SUV, hand resting on Hunter's back. You knew, he said. You knew she was in there. Hunter looked up and licked Mason's glove. By morning, the town of Redwood Hollow was already buzzing. A teenage girl nearly froze to death behind a locked freezer door. The manager, arrested on the spot, charged with attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, and tampering with security systems. The footage Kayla had recorded on her phone, recovered, backed up to her cloud. She'd caught Clay stealing expired painkillers from the pharmacy section and possibly reselling them. She threatened to report it. So he trapped her, left her there to freeze. At the local diner, people clutched coffee mugs tighter when they heard the story. The news hit hard. In a town like Redwood Hollow, that kind of thing wasn't supposed to happen. But thanks to one dog, one determined, relentless German shepherd, it didn't end in tragedy. They'd found her in time. The storm had passed by sunrise, leaving behind a glassy frost over the streets of Redwood Hollow. Trees drooped under the weight of fresh snow, and rooftops shimmered like they'd been dipped in sugar. But under all that calm beauty, the town was waking up to something much colder. A dark truth no one had expected. In the quiet hospital room at Redwood County Medical, 17-year-old Kayla Winters was alive, but pale. Her cheeks still held a bluish hue, and her voice came in a whisper, raspy from breathing freezer air for hours. But her mind, still sharp. His name's Clay Rourke, she said, her fingers wrapped tightly around the warm styrofoam cup the nurse had given her. He saw me recording him. I tried to walk out. He stopped me. Across the room, Officer Mason Hale stood beside a heater vent, arms crossed, jaw tight. Hunter lay curled at his feet, eyes half open but alert. The dog hadn't left his side since the night before. You're sure he pushed you into the freezer? Mason asked gently. Kayla nodded. He said no one would believe me anyway, that he'd fix it before anyone knew. Mason glanced at the nurse, who stepped out quietly to give them space. Hunter lifted his head. His eyes shifted toward the window. Even now, the dog didn't fully relax. Did you see what he was doing in the back? Mason asked. Kayla's brows furrowed. He had this big black duffel bag. I saw him stuffing expired bottles from the pharmacy shelves into it, like a lot of them. Pain meds, cold meds, things they're supposed to toss. Any idea why? He had a burner phone in the office. I think he was meeting someone. Mason knelt down and looked into her eyes. You did the right thing, he said. Kayla smiled faintly. You know it was Hunter who saved me, right? I saw his face when the door opened. I thought I was dreaming. Mason reached down and ruffled the dog's neck. He's got a nose for trouble, he said, and a stubborn streak a mile long. Later that morning, Mason stood inside Burke's Market, this time with a search warrant in hand. The store looked eerily normal. The aisles were neat, the shelves full. A few early bird employees had returned to restock perishables and clear out snow near the loading dock, whispering about the arrest. Detective Sergeant Evelyn Martin, who'd just driven in from county, met Mason near the break room. "You really think the kid's telling the truth?" she asked, flipping through her notes. "She's sharp, remembered details, times colors of labels. The kind of stuff that checks out," Mason said. "And the dog?" Hunter locked on to that freezer door like his life depended on it. "We were 2 hours out from losing that girl." Evelyn raised a brow. "Sounds like this guy wasn't just stealing expired meds." "That's what I'm thinking." They pushed through the office door, where Mason had first seen Clay fumble for keys. Now it was a crime scene. The desk had been turned over, drawers emptied, but someone hadn't been careful. Behind a loose ceiling tile, tucked between insulation panels, they found a Ziploc bag full of prepaid phone cards, a notebook filled with cryptic numbers and initials, and a USB drive. "Hunter, search," Mason said, pointing to the far wall. The German shepherd sniffed once, twice, then barked, pawing at the floorboard under the desk. Evelyn bent down and popped the tile open. Inside was another burner phone and a worn leather wallet with a folded receipt, dated 2 nights ago. "Warehouse rental," she said, reading it aloud. "Location? Hickory Junction. That's 2 miles outside of town." Mason looked at Hunter. "Let's roll." By noon, they were pulling up to a beat-up storage facility outside town limits. The kind of place where old furniture, rusty snowmobiles, and forgotten junk went to die. But unit number 17 had a newer padlock on it. Too new, too clean. Mason looked at Evelyn. "You got bolt cutters?" "Always." With a snap of the chain, they threw the door open. Inside, crates, dozens of them, labeled like they'd been shipped. But no branding, no store logos. Just initials, CRX 201. Hunter stepped in first. His nose wrinkled. He walked slowly, deliberately toward one of the crates, then started barking. Mason pried open the top. Inside were pharmaceutical bottles, neatly packed. Painkillers, antibiotics, controlled substances, some still with pharmacy barcodes. Evelyn swore under her breath. "This isn't just about expired meds," she said. "This is full-on black market diversion." "They were rerouting inventory," Mason added. "Probably selling it out of state or moving it off the books." "And Clay?" "Was likely just the local handler." Back at the Redwood County Jail, Clay Rourke was sitting in an interview room, still wearing his Berks Market name tag. He wasn't so calm anymore. Mason sat across from him, the USB drive and a printed warehouse receipt on the table between them. "You lied about not knowing where she was," Mason said. Clay shifted. "I was scared. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just panicked." "You locked her in a freezer," Evelyn cut in. "That's attempted murder." "She had footage," Clay snapped. "She was going to ruin everything. You think I wanted this job? I had no choice." "What about the warehouse?" Mason asked, voice low. Clay blinked. "Warehouse?" "We found the crates," Evelyn said, "the notebook, the phone." Clay exhaled shakily. "I never touched that stuff. I just held it, stored it till someone came by. I don't even know who they were, just wore hats, masks. They paid cash." "You get paid?" He nodded. 500 a drop. Mason pushed the notebook forward. "You wrote these initials?" "No, that was already there." "And you expect us to believe that?" Clay went quiet. Hunter let out a single low growl from where he lay at Mason's side. That evening, Mason returned home, exhausted. His boots were soaked. His radio crackled with chatter, but he muted it. He tossed his keys into the bowl near the door and dropped onto the couch. Hunter jumped up beside him. "You did good," Mason said, rubbing behind the dog's ears. Hunter thumped his tail once against the cushion, then rested his head on Mason's lap. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky had cleared, revealing a bright orange sunset that cast long shadows across the small town streets. Kayla was recovering. Clay was in custody, and the investigation had just blown open a trafficking ring no one in town even suspected. All because a dog wouldn't stop barking at a freezer door. The cold crept in slowly. Not all at once like you'd expect, but inch by inch, breath by breath, like something waiting patiently to take you. That's what Kayla Winters remembered the most. Not the shove, not the click of the heavy metal door locking behind her, not even the echo of her own voice as she screamed for help, but the cold, how it climbed inside her chest, how it slowed her thoughts, how it made her feel like maybe she wasn't even real anymore. She'd tried to stay awake. She'd paced back and forth at first, stomping her feet, clapping all her hands, muttering the lyrics to her favorite country songs under her breath. Then when her legs got numb, she found a spot near the big meat racks where the airflow wasn't as strong and tried to focus on her breathing. In, out, in, out. She even tried yelling again, but her voice cracked against the hum of the compressors. When she finally sat down, her knees gave out like jelly. Her fingers had gone too stiff to pull out her phone. She dropped it near the door while trying to record a second video for evidence. The screen went dark almost instantly. That's when she knew, if nobody came, she wasn't making it out. But then, just as her eyelids started getting too heavy, she heard a sound. A bark. Loud, commanding, muffled by inches of metal and ice. No way, she thought. That's not real. That's just my brain playing tricks on me again. But then came the pounding. Boom, boom, boom. Then voices. A crack of light. And then a face. A real face. Not imagined. Officer Mason Hale. Behind him, Hunter, his big brown and black German shepherd, pushed past and ran to her. He licked her face. That warmth, that wet tongue, that fuzzy head nudging her chin. It pulled her back, just enough. Kayla's hospital room was quiet that night. Outside the window, a single snowplow rolled slowly down the street, clearing the remains of the blizzard from the previous day. Her room smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and cinnamon from the muffin her mom had left on the side table. Mason stood near the door, coffee in hand, watching her sleep. Her vitals were good. She was stable. Her color had returned. "Looks like she's going to be okay," said Nurse Linda, checking the IV line. Mason nodded. "She's tough." Hunter sat beside him, still, patient. His ears perked when the heart monitor beeped slightly faster as Kayla stirred. When she opened her eyes, she smiled weakly. "Hey, you stayed." Mason smiled back. "You gave us quite the scare, kiddo." She turned her eyes toward Hunter. "Is he always that smart?" "Smarter than most people I know," Mason said, sipping his lukewarm coffee. Kayla's mom, Deborah, stepped in quietly behind him, holding a small bag of clothes. She wanted me to bring her old phone, said she might have saved something. Mason took the bag gently. "Thanks, Deborah. We're going to check everything, just to be sure." Deborah nodded, eyes misty. "Thank you for finding her, both of you." She knelt and gave Hunter a firm hug. Later that day, Mason sat at his desk at the Redwood Police Department, phone plugged into his laptop. A tech assistant from the county sheriff's office, Tyler, helped run data recovery software. "So what exactly are we looking for?" Tyler asked. "Any video, audio, or message from the day she went missing." The software ticked along, lines of code dancing across the screen. Then, beep, a thumbnail appeared. "Got one," Tyler said. "Looks like it was recorded about 20 minutes before she was locked in." They clicked play. The grainy footage showed Clay Rourke, the store manager, digging through a pharmacy cabinet in the back of the store. He was wearing gloves and stuffing bottles of prescription pills into a black duffel bag. He looked up once, straight at the camera, just before the video cut off. "Boom," Tyler said. "That's all we need." Mason leaned back in his chair. That combined with what we found in the warehouse. Clay's looking at federal charges. "Think he was working alone?" Mason shook his head. "No way." Meanwhile, back at the jail, Clay Rourke was sitting alone in a holding cell, hunched over, biting his nails. He hadn't spoken a word since his initial interview. No phone call, no lawyer. But that wouldn't last long, because across town, a federal task force had been quietly notified. The presence of controlled substances, off-book distribution channels, and evidence of interstate shipping had triggered something bigger. Clay had stumbled out of his league. And Kayla's video? That was the key that unlocked the whole operation. That night, Mason returned to the hospital with a copy of the video on a flash drive. Kayla sat up straighter when he entered, wearing a fresh hoodie and sipping broth from a paper cup. "Feel like watching something?" he asked. Kayla tilted her head. "Is it the video?" He nodded. "The one you shot." She bit her lip. "I was scared. I thought maybe if something happened, someone would find it." "Well," Mason said, kneeling next to her, "you saved your own life, and probably a few more." He showed her the flash drive. "We've got enough now to bring down the whole network Clay was working for." "You did good, Kayla." She blinked fast. "Really?" Hunter stepped forward and placed his paw gently on her blanket. "Really," Mason said. Back at the department the next morning, Mason stood in front of a whiteboard filled with sticky notes, shipping routes, and photos of seized crates. Officers from state and federal agencies milled around the room. They were building a case. "We've traced at least 4 other drops matching the same packaging," Evelyn said. "One went to Spokane, one to Missoula. These weren't just random sales. Someone was organizing it. And Clay was the middleman," Mason said. "We're going to need every file, receipt, and employee schedule from Burke's. If anyone else was involved, we find out now." Hunter, lying in the corner, gave a low grunt of agreement. That afternoon, Mason and Hunter returned once more to Burke's Market. It felt strange walking through the aisles knowing what had happened here. Parents pushing carts, kids whining for snacks, everything back to normal on the surface. But in the back, in the freezer, that memory would never go away. Hunter paused at the entrance of the stockroom, sniffed the air, and let out a short huff. "Nothing left, huh?" Mason said softly. The dog turned, eyes steady. As they stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, the wind no longer screamed. The sidewalks were clear, snow piled on the curbs, melting slowly. Mason took a deep breath. Sometimes the job left scars on the body, on the heart. But sometimes you got to save someone. Sometimes you got to witness a miracle wrapped in fur and instinct. He reached down and scratched behind Hunter's ear. "Couldn't have done any of this without you, buddy." Hunter leaned into the touch and wagged his tail. 2 days had passed since Officer Mason Hale and K9 Hunter had pulled 17-year-old Kayla Winters from the freezer at Burke's Market. The town of Redwood Hollow had returned to business as usual on the surface. School buses chugged down icy roads. Morning coffee orders were yelled over diner counters, and the local radio station played a loop of weather updates and classic country hits. But beneath the normalcy, something was still brewing, and Mason knew it. Back at the precinct, the department's small briefing room had transformed into case headquarters. A dry erase board mapped out warehouse drop locations. A corkboard displayed mugshots, receipts, and surveillance images recovered from the USB drive found in Clay Rourke's office. Detective Sergeant Evelyn Martin held up a printed email. "According to this manifest," she said, 2 more crates left Burke's last week before the storm. They were labeled CRX 212 and CRX 213. The delivery was scheduled for a trucking terminal in Boise. The catch? Neither crate arrived. Mason rubbed his temples. "So we're missing 2 full shipments?" "Yep. Gone, not signed in, no tracking numbers, nothing." Hunter, sprawled under the table, thumped his tail once but kept his eyes closed. Even he seemed to know this wasn't over. That same morning, Kayla sat at home on her family's living room couch, wrapped in 2 blankets, a mug of hot cocoa balanced in her lap. Her cheeks were pink again, the color had returned to her lips, but she wasn't smiling. On the coffee table in front of her sat a notebook, the one Clay had kept hidden in the ceiling of the Burke's manager's office. Mason had dropped it off earlier that morning, letting her glance through it in case anything looked familiar. She flipped through page after page of strange scribbles, dates, initials, codes that didn't make much sense. Then she stopped. "Wait." Kayla leaned forward and stared at the corner of one page. Tucked between 2 codes was a name she recognized. Lana B. That was the name of another cashier who used to work weekends, someone Kayla hadn't seen in almost a month. She picked up her phone and dialed Mason immediately. Mason answered on the second ring. "You're sure?" he asked. "Positive," Kayla said. "Lana Benson. She worked 2 registers down from me. Quiet girl, always nervous. She quit out of nowhere a few weeks ago." "Did she say anything before she left?" "Just that she didn't feel safe." That was enough for Mason. Within an hour, Mason and Evelyn were knocking on the door of a small trailer parked near the edge of town. The woman who opened the door was thin, early 20s, and looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes darted between them like a cornered rabbit. "Lana Benson?" Mason asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about Clay Rourke," Evelyn said, showing her badge. Lana's lower lip trembled. She stepped aside, letting them in. The inside of the trailer smelled faintly of cat food and lavender. A single electric heater buzzed in the corner. Lana sat on the edge of a recliner, knees drawn to her chest. "I didn't know what he was doing at first," she whispered. "He always kept things secret, locked cabinets, late-night drop-offs. I just figured he was weird." "When did that change?" Mason asked. "The night I walked in on him in the pharmacy," Lana said. "He was dumping meds into bags and muttering to himself. He didn't even notice I was there." "Did you report it?" Lana looked down. "No, I got scared. He saw me later and told me if I ever talked, bad things would happen. He said he had people who cleaned up loose ends. I quit the next day." Evelyn exchanged a look with Mason. "Do you know where he kept those bags?" Mason asked. "He didn't keep them at the store," she said. "There's an old walk-in freezer behind the store. Used to be part of the old butcher shop before Burke's expanded. It's not on the blueprint anymore, but it's still there, hidden behind shelving in the back hallway." Mason stood up. "Let's go." Back at Burke's, Mason and Evelyn entered through the rear service entrance. Most of the staff were out front, unaware that their store was about to give up its last secret. Hunter led the way, his nose to the ground, body tense with focus. They reached the end of a narrow hallway where emergency paper towels and mop buckets were kept. Hunter stopped, sniffed. Then he growled. There, Lana said, pointing. Behind that panel. Mason pulled at the corner of the plywood. It gave way with a creak. Behind it, a steel door, crusted with age and sealed with a rusted deadbolt. Evelyn forced it open with a crowbar. What they saw inside stopped them cold. The hidden freezer had clearly been used as a stash site, not just for drugs, but also cash, burner phones, and counterfeit IDs. The walls were lined with metal shelving, packed with plastic containers, some labeled with codes that matched the notebook Kayla had found. Hunter circled slowly, sniffing at everything. This is where Clay prepped everything, Mason said. Evelyn snapped photos while Mason called it in. That's when Hunter let out a low bark from the back corner. There, behind an overturned crate, was a second notebook. This one had names, full names. People from town, employees, and besides several names, there were check marks. Others were crossed out, and one name stood out, circled in red ink. Kayla Winters. Mason stared at it for a long moment. His jaw clenched. He had a list. Evelyn nodded grimly, and she was next. That night, Mason sat on his front porch, the weight of the day settling heavy in his bones. Hunter sat beside him, eyes fixed on the snowy woods beyond the driveway. The case had grown far beyond a simple theft ring. There were layers, connections, and the girl they'd saved had been closer to danger than any of them realized. But thanks to one stubborn K9 and a teenager brave enough to hit record, they had peeled back the first layer of a much deeper conspiracy. "You did good, boy," Mason said, resting his hand on Hunter's broad back. Hunter let out a low huff and leaned into the touch. Inside the house, Mason's radio buzzed. Another call was coming in. But for one more minute, they stayed there. Just man and dog, sitting in the quiet, breathing in the cold, knowing the fight wasn't over yet. The snow along Main Street had finally melted into slush, but the cold wasn't gone. In Redwood Hollow, winter liked to linger. The same could be said about the case that now gripped the town. It wasn't letting go. 2 weeks had passed since the arrest of Clay Rourke. He sat in the county jail awaiting trial, a pale shadow of the arrogant manager who once ran Burke's Market. But Mason Hale knew the case was bigger than Clay. The hidden freezer, the stash of drugs, the notebooks with names, it all pointed to something wider, something organized, and it was about to get darker. Mason sat at his desk in the small precinct office, the second notebook spread open in front of him. The list of names scrawled across the pages gnawed at him. Some were employees he recognized, cashiers, clerks, even a delivery driver or two. Others were locals he'd only heard of in passing, but one name kept him awake at night. Kayla Winters, circled, underlined, red ink. Hunter sat nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes following Mason's every move. The dog hadn't relaxed since they discovered the list. Every sudden noise made his ears perk up. Every visitor to the station earned a cautious sniff. It was as though Hunter knew Kayla wasn't out of danger yet. Detective Sergeant Evelyn Martin walked in, coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. "You're not going to like this," she said, sliding the folder onto the desk. Mason raised a brow. "Haven't liked much lately. What's inside?" "Digital forensics report. That USB drive we pulled from Clay's office had more than we thought." Mason opened the folder. Printed screenshots lined the pages. Emails, spreadsheets, scanned invoices. "These aren't just records," Evelyn said. "They're orders. Shipments scheduled months in advance. Someone higher up was coordinating where the crates went, who picked them up, and how they got moved. Clay was just a cog." Mason skimmed the pages. One email header made him stop cold. "To C. Rourke from V. Hayes at..." The name hit him like a gut punch. "Victor Hayes," Mason muttered. "I know that name." Evelyn nodded grimly. "He's a distributor out of Spokane. DEA's had him on a watch list for years. Word is he launders through small-town grocery stores and storage facilities." "So Redwood Hollow wasn't random," Mason said. "They planted Clay here." "Exactly, and they almost got away with it." The deeper Mason dug into the files, the worse it got. Bank transfers, cash drops, delivery routes. It wasn't just drugs. They were moving stolen pharmaceuticals across 3 states. And Kayla? She hadn't just stumbled across Clay stealing. Her video threatened to expose the entire operation. Hunter let out a soft whine, as if echoing Mason's thoughts. "Yeah, bud," Mason whispered. "This isn't over." Later that afternoon, Mason drove out to the Winters house. The sun was low, painting the snowbanks in pink and orange hues. Deborah Winters greeted him at the door, eyes weary but grateful. "She's upstairs," Deborah said softly. "She's been having trouble sleeping, nightmares." Mason nodded. "That's normal. Trauma takes time." When he stepped into Kayla's room, Hunter trotted ahead, tail wagging gently. Kayla sat cross-legged on her bed, textbooks open but untouched. Her face brightened when she saw the dog. "Hunter!" she exclaimed, hugging him tight. "I swear he's the only reason I don't freak out walking into a grocery store now." Mason smiled faintly. "Glad he's helping. Listen, I came by to talk." Kayla's expression grew serious. "Is it about the notebook?" Mason sat on the edge of the bed. "Yeah, your name wasn't the only one, but it was circled. That means you were on their radar." Kayla shivered. "So even if Clay's locked up, someone else might still be watching," Mason finished. "We're taking precautions. I've already asked for patrols to swing by here nightly." Kayla looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "I don't want to go back to school yet. I can't even walk down the hall without thinking someone's behind me." Hunter pressed his head into her lap, sensing her unease. "You don't have to rush," Mason said gently. "But I need you to remember, you're not alone." Hunter's proof of that. The next morning, Mason and Evelyn drove to a storage unit facility 2 counties over. DEA had flagged it as another suspected stash site linked to Hayes. Hunter came along, riding shotgun as always. Snow crunched under their boots as they approached Unit 46. A faint chemical smell wafted out even before the lock was cut. Hunter stiffened, nose twitching. "Smells like something's fresh," Mason muttered. Inside the unit were more crates, identical to the ones in Redwood Hollow. But this time, tucked in the corner, they found something else. A laptop, still warm. "Someone was here," Evelyn said. Mason connected it to a portable drive. Files flooded the screen. This was the mother lode: shipping logs, email drafts, scanned IDs of buyers, and one chilling document labeled cleanup. Inside was a list of targets. Not employees, not couriers, witnesses. And again, one name stood out: Kayla Winters. Back at the precinct, Mason slammed the file onto the desk. "They're not done. Hayes still has people on the ground." Evelyn pinched the bridge of her nose. "We'll need federal protection for her. Witness program, maybe." Mason shook his head. "She's just a kid. She deserves a normal life, not hiding in some safe house across the state." Hunter barked once, sharp as if in agreement. Evelyn's eyes softened. Normal went out the window when she pressed record. That evening, Mason couldn't shake the tension. He and Hunter drove slow patrol through the outskirts of town, headlights cutting through the dark. Every shadow felt heavier. Every passing truck seemed to linger too long. When they rolled by Burke's Market, Mason slowed down. The neon sign buzzed faintly. The parking lot was empty except for a single delivery van parked near the back. Mason frowned. "That wasn't standard," Hunter growled. Mason flipped off his headlights and parked at the edge of the lot. He reached for his radio. "Unit 12. Possible unauthorized vehicle at Burke's, requesting backup." Before he finished, the van's engine roared to life. Tires screeched against ice. The vehicle bolted out of the lot, speeding into the night. Mason gunned the SUV, sirens flashing. Hunter braced against the dashboard, eyes locked on the fleeing van. The chase tore down the snow-packed back roads, headlights bouncing, adrenaline surging. Mason kept his focus sharp, Hunter's bark ringing in his ears. Finally, the van swerved too hard on a curve and spun into a snowbank. Mason pulled up fast, weapon drawn. "Police, show me your hands!" 2 men stumbled out, masks covering their faces. One bolted into the woods, the other froze. Hunter lunged forward at Mason's signal, tackling the runner into the snow. The suspect yelped, pinned under 85 pounds of muscle and fury until Mason cuffed him. The van's back doors were left ajar. Inside were more crates, but this time not just drugs. Mason's blood went cold. There were binders full of files, names, addresses, photos. The conspiracy wasn't just about money, it was about power. And Kayla's name was written there too, highlighted, marked for elimination. Back at the precinct, Mason stared at the files laid across the table. Evelyn stood beside him, pale. They were tracking her movements, she said, school schedule, work hours, even her bus route from last semester. Mason clenched his fists. "This isn't just a drug ring. This is organized crime, and they don't leave loose ends." Hunter growled low, pacing the room. Mason looked down at his partner. "Don't worry, boy. We're not letting them touch her. Not now, not ever." That night, Mason pulled his SUV into the Winters' driveway. He didn't knock. He just sat in the driver's seat, watching the warm light glowing from the windows, Hunter at his side. Inside, Kayla was probably finishing homework, sipping tea, trying to be normal again. She didn't know that powerful men hundreds of miles away still wanted her gone. But Mason knew, and he silently vowed to stand between her and every shadow that tried to reach her. Hunter shifted, laying his head on Mason's armrest, eyes never leaving the house. "We'll guard her," Mason whispered, "as long as it takes." Hunter wagged his tail once, solemn and sure. The trial of Clay Rourke began on a cold March morning. Snow still lingered in patches along the sidewalks of Redwood Hollow, though spring sunlight glinted through bare branches, hinting at warmer days ahead. For the first time since that terrible night in the freezer, Kayla Winters walked into the courthouse with her chin lifted high. She wasn't alone. Beside her, mother stood Officer Mason Hale, his presence steady, protective, like a wall that couldn't be moved. And padding faithfully at his side was Hunter, the golden-brown German shepherd whose nose and instincts had saved Kayla's life. Cameras clicked outside as local reporters shouted questions. Kayla's hands shook, but Hunter brushed his body against her leg, calming her nerves. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. The courtroom buzzed with tension. When Clay was led in, shackled, head bowed, Kayla's breath caught. She remembered the slam of the freezer door, the suffocating cold, the mocking look in his eyes. But now, he looked small, defeated. The prosecutor stood tall as she read the charges. Attempted murder, kidnapping, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, racketeering. Each word was a nail sealing Clay's fate. During testimony, Mason was called to the stand. He described the night of the blizzard, Hunter's refusal to leave Burke's Market, the pink mitten in the snow, and the desperate rescue from the freezer. The jurors leaned forward, listening closely. "Would you have found Kayla without your K9 partner?" the prosecutor asked. Mason's eyes softened as he glanced at Hunter resting quietly near Kayla. "Honestly? No, he's the reason she's alive. Hunter didn't just find her, he refused to give up on her. That's the kind of partner he is." A ripple of emotion moved through the courtroom. Then came Kayla's turn. She took the stand, hands trembling at first, but her voice grew stronger as she spoke. She explained how she discovered Clay's theft, how she used her phone to record proof, and how he locked her away when he realized she had evidence. "I thought I was going to die," she admitted, her eyes shining with tears. "But I held on because I hoped someone would find me, and they did. Officer Hale and Hunter, they didn't stop until they did." Even the judge looked moved. The trial lasted a week. By Friday, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Clay Rourke was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without parole. But the case didn't stop with him. The files seized from the warehouse and the laptop uncovered a wide network. Federal agents traced the chain back to Spokane, Seattle, and beyond. Arrests were made across 3 states. Redwood Hollow, once just a sleepy mountain town, had played an unexpected role in tearing down a criminal operation worth millions. And it all started with a dog's bark at a freezer door. A month later, the town gathered in the high school gymnasium for a community celebration. Folding chairs filled the basketball court. A makeshift stage held a podium draped in an American flag. Kids waved homemade posters reading "Thank you, Hunter," while parents chatted with pride. The mayor stepped up to the microphone. "Tonight, we recognize the bravery, dedication, and heart of those who protect us. Officer Hale and his K9 partner, Hunter, represent the best of Redwood Hollow and the best of what it means to never give up on each other." The crowd erupted in applause. Mason, a little embarrassed, walked Hunter up to the stage. The dog's ears twitched at the loud cheers, but he stayed calm, tail wagging gently. The mayor held up a small medal hanging from a blue ribbon. With careful hands, he slipped it around Hunter's neck. "This is the first time in our town's history we've awarded a Medal of Valor to a 4-legged officer. Hunter, you are truly one of Redwood Hollow's heroes." The gym thundered with clapping, whistles, and stomping feet. Kayla wiped at her eyes, smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Mason bent to whisper in Hunter's ear, "You earned it, partner." After the ceremony, Mason and Kayla stood outside near the steps of the gym. The spring air was crisp, but no longer bitter. For the first time in months, Kayla felt warmth, inside and out. "Do you think I'll ever stop being scared?" she asked softly. Mason thought for a moment. "Maybe not completely, but fear doesn't get the last word. You do. And every day you choose to keep living, to keep telling your story, you take that power back." Kayla nodded slowly. Hunter nudged her hand and she scratched behind his ears. "I owe you both everything," she whispered. "You owe us nothing," Mason said gently. "You were brave. You trusted your gut. You fought to stay alive. Don't forget that." Life in Redwood Hollow returned to rhythm in the weeks that followed. Burke's Market came under new management. Security cameras were upgraded. Parents were stricter about their kids' curfews. And yet, there was a sense of pride humming through town because evil had been confronted and good had prevailed. For Mason, the job didn't stop. He still patrolled icy roads, answered domestic calls, and checked on elderly neighbors during storms. But every time he looked at Hunter, he felt a surge of gratitude. This dog wasn't just his partner. He was proof that instincts, when trusted, could save lives. As for Kayla, she slowly returned to normal. She finished her junior year strong. She began speaking at school assemblies about courage and speaking up when something felt wrong. She carried Hunter's photo on her phone like a lucky charm, and when asked what she wanted to do after graduation, she smiled and said, "Something that helps people, like Officer Hale, or maybe with me." On a quiet evening months later, Mason and Hunter sat on Mason's porch again, the sunset painting the hills orange. The world felt calm, safe. "You know," Mason said, rubbing Hunter's fur, "you may not understand medals or speeches, but you knew something was wrong that night. You wouldn't let it go. That stubborn nose of yours. It saved her life." Hunter leaned his head on Mason's knee, eyes soft, tail swishing against the wooden porch. Mason chuckled. "Guess that makes you the real detective between us." The dog huffed as if in agreement. And so in a small mountain town where nothing much usually happened, a K9 named Hunter reminded everyone what loyalty and courage look like. He didn't give up. He didn't ignore what his instincts told him. He barked, he scratched, he fought, until a girl in desperate need was found. Sometimes heroes wear badges. Sometimes they wear collars. Thank you for following this story of bravery, survival, and justice. Now I want to ask you, what do you think? Do animals have instincts that can sense danger long before humans ever notice? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your stories.